Yo, Chuck.
Hey guys, got a video today on how to make a pivot function. So all a pivot is just an element in an array. Let's say our pivot is 5. We're going to want all other elements that are greater than 5 to be pushed to the right, and all other elements that are lesser than 5 to be pushed to the left. And notice these elements that are being pushed, they're not in any order. The whole point of the pivot function is just to have whatever the pivot is be ordered in its correct position relative to all the other elements. So if I was to organize these elements, the index of 0, 1, 2, that's where 5 belongs in this pivot function. So let's go ahead and make this. Const pivot, and it's going to take an array, a starting position we're going to set to 0, and then an end we're going to set to array length -1. I'm going to get rid of this. Okay. All right, so the first thing we need to do is make our variable pivot, and I'm going to set it to the array at start, so just the very first element. And for simplicity's sake, let me actually pass an array in real quick so I can kind of explain this as I'm going on. All right, something like that. Let me change this around. Okay. Cool, so we have an array we're passing in, and then now we've defined our pivot function. So our pivot is going to be this first element here. Notice that you could have a pivot anywhere, but for this algorithm, I'm going to start it at the very first element of the array. That's why we're saying array at start, which is 0. And then we're going to define a swap index and just set that to 0 or start. Now I'm going to loop over the data. But I don't need to loop over the pivot itself, so I'm just going to loop over this data right here. So I'm going to make a variable I and set it to start +1, and then have I less than array.length, I++. So now basically we're going to go through this data, and if the pivot is larger than the data, we are going to increase our swap index and then swap wherever the swap index is with that current element in the array. So that's kind of a mouthful. Let me show you what I mean real quick. So I'm going to do an if conditional. If pivot is greater than array at index I, then I want to increase my swap index. And then I'm going to swap wherever my swap index is with my array at I. So I'm going to do let temp equal array at swap index. And then array at swap index is going to equal array at I. And then array at I equals temp. So that's just a way to swap these two guys right here. We're using a temp variable to store the value of swap index before it's altered. So then when we assign it to array at I, it's the correct value. So let's just pause right here and kind of go over what is going to happen. So I'm going to copy this code, comment it out. So this is what we start off with. We go through an iteration. We're going to say, is our pivot greater than array at index I? It's not. So we're actually not going to do anything the first iteration. The second iteration of our for loop, we're going to say, is pivot greater than 3? Yes, it is. So we're going to increase our swap index, right? We're incrementing that. And then we're going to swap the swap index, the array at swap index, with the array at index I. So we're going to swap 7 and 3. So let me just pseudocode this out real quick. So I'm going to swap 7 and 3. And to prove that, I can just return the array when this happens. So let's see, it should end up like this because we're swapping 7 and 3. And it looks like it does. So you can see that we're just incrementing that swap index, and then whatever the pivot was greater than on the array at index I, we're swapping that with the array at swap index. Okay, so this will pretty much get us like 99% of the way there. as far as the swap index of 5 relative to all the other elements. Because remember, the swap index at the very end is just where 5 goes in relative to all these elements in the array. So if I was to return the array at the end, you'll notice we need to do one more step, and that's change where 5 lands. So actually, because you'll notice 5 is at the start still, and obviously 5 is supposed to be somewhere in the middle here. So what I'm going to do is actually just run a swap one last time. So we'll say let temp equal array at swap index. And then I'll say array at swap index equals array at start, because I want to now swap whatever the swap index is with start. And then array at start equals temp. So this should fix the problem, and now 5 should be in the correct position. Let's see. So run that, and it looks like that is correct, because you'll notice all elements less than 5 are on the left-hand side. All elements greater than 5 are on the right-hand side. But as with this function, the goal is not to actually return the array. We just want to return the swap index, which is 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that looks good. So this is kind of not very intuitive, and it's kind of a heavy lift, I think. It makes a little more sense the more you do it, but it's still kind of it's just a difficult algorithm to wrap your head around. Just remember, although you're comparing the pivot to the array at I, you're actually not even swapping the pivot until the very end. You're just swapping whatever the swap index is with array at I. So I think that's kind of the confusing part. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for more in the future. Thank you.